I attended the first anti-Zionist Jewish conference in Vienna. It was very well attended. The message was very strong, but I think they were still in the formulation of identity. Who are we? Why are we doing this? Who do we actually represent? Is there enough representation of Jews coming from the global South, for example, versus the global North? So they were just still dealing with the very fundamentals of who they are and what's the relationship to the struggle into where they stand today as more representative, more accepted, more global. And I mean, there's just the first day itself. I mean, the first day event, over 1,000 people were there. And they represent numerous organizations from all over the world. That was quite uplifting. It felt like there is a reversal that is happening here. If you compare to how the Zionists hijacked Jewish communities and the Jewish religion and Jewish culture in the late 19th century, you feel that there is a process of reclamation that is taking place today, where the global Jews are saying, I'm going to take my religion back. I'm going to take my identity back, and I'm going to take my culture back, and Zionism does not represent me. And I think that's a great source for hope.
Hello and welcome back to the Focus Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Bruni. Thanks for joining us. Over the past couple of years, the Israel-Palestine conflict has deeply impacted the Middle East. What began on October the 7th, 2023 has now metastasized into a much broader war that has drawn in Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the US, and many of the region's major players. But with all of that going on, there's still one big question at the heart of it all. What's actually happening to ordinary Palestinians? Has the war totally changed the chances for a real Palestinian state? Is Hamas still a major player even after everything that's happened in Gaza? Does the Palestinian Authority really speak for the people anymore? And where does Palestine fit into the thinking of places like Washington, Moscow, and across the Arab world? To help us unpack these issues, I'm pleased to welcome back one of the world's leading Palestinian journalists, historians, and political commentators, Dr. Ramzy Baroud. Ramzy Baroud is the editor of the Palestine Chronicle, a well-known author, and a senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs. Ramzy, it's great to have you back on the show. It's been far too long.
Thank you for having me, John. Always a pleasure.
Ramzy, you've literally just stepped off the plane from Dublin. You've returned from the Second Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress. What was the central message you wanted delegates to take away from your presentation?
First of all, great to be back on the show, John, and thank you for keeping up with the great work. I think there were two different messages. The message that I tried to communicate, but also the message that I received as well. And the message that I tried to communicate is that we are hoping that the Jewish community becomes that is anti-Zionist and pro-Palestine and believes in justice and coexistence in Palestine, ultimately kind of moves beyond the marginal position that they have been placed in for various reasons, and abandon the slogan, that Israel does not speak on behalf of the world Jewish community, and whatever Israel is doing to the Palestinians should not be done in their names and so forth, to a more active slogan of being part of the struggle for coexistence in Palestine and a future without Zionism. And that was my message, but the surprise was that's the message I received as well. It seems that they are already moving in that direction. They are moving from the passive, you don't speak in my name sort of slogan, to that of the active, strong and powerful slogan that I want to be part of the liberation of Palestine, as many of them were Israeli Jews, by the way, as Jews around the world, and they were unifying in ways that I also kind of took me by surprise. I mean, I attended the first anti-Zionist Jewish conference in Vienna. It was very well attended. The message was very strong, but I think they were still in the formulation of identity. Who are we? Why are we doing this? Who do we actually represent? Is there enough representation of Jews coming from the global south, for example, versus the global north? So they were just still dealing with the very fundamentals of who they are and what's the relationship to the struggle into where they stand today as more representative, more accepted, more global. And I mean, there's just the first day itself. I mean, the first day event, over 1,000 people were there. And they represent numerous organizations from all over the world. That was quite uplifting. It felt like there is a reversal that is happening here. If you compare to how the Zionists hijacked Jewish communities and the Jewish religion and Jewish culture in the late 19th century, you feel that there is a process of reclamation that is taking place today, where the global Jews are saying, I'm going to take my religion back. I'm going to take my identity back, and I'm going to take my culture back, and Zionism does not represent me. And I think that's a great source for hope.
You know, I don't want to be the guy that spoils the optimism here, but there's an observation that I've had about how Israel and its population have evolved over the last, I don't know, decade or so. There's been an outpouring of the liberal Israeli citizen. These people have left Israel. They've got jack of the system, which they've seen become very, very hard. Most of them have decided to, leave. They go to Vienna, they go to Berlin, they go to New York City, and they can sit in safety and complain about Israel from a distance. But ultimately, that has absolutely no bearing on what goes on in Israel. Would you say that in a strange kind of way, them abandoning Israel in the way that they have to safer, more freer environments doesn't do the state of Israel any favors, because they've literally handed the keys to the kingdom over to the likes of Bibi Netanyahu and his cohort of extremists in the Knesset?
That's a really good point, John. And I think the jury is still out on this one. This is what we know. We know that a large number of Israelis, some people count them in the hundreds of thousands, and others would say, reached even more, although it's very difficult to tell who is coming and who is permanently gone. But let's remember that ultimately the war in Palestine is a demographic war for Israel. I mean, it's
Yeah.
always been a demographic war. For us, Palestinians is our culture, it's our identity, it's our olive trees, it's our mountains, it's our valleys, it's our Gaza and Ramallah and Jerusalem. But for those who came from Poland and Ukraine and Lithuania and ultimately New York and Berlin and so forth, for them, it was about numbers. We need to be a lot more than they are. So that's what the whole ethnic cleansing is about. Ethnic cleansing is often understood, and as correctly so, of course, as a war crime, and crimes against humanity and so forth. It's always kind of seen from an international law point of view, but it's rarely seen from the actual dynamics that Israel wanted to use ethnic cleansing for, which is to push as many Palestinians out and to bring as many Jews in. Now, we are seeing some strange trend happening. The attempt to ethnically cleanse Gaza, although it's still in play, have failed. But for me, what was more important than its failure is the fact that when the UN and the Red Cross and others came and said to the Palestinians, who wants to leave Gaza for various reasons, education, healthcare, surgeries, all these wounded, you have tens of thousands of wounded who need medical treatment in Gaza following the genocide, or the ongoing genocide rather. About 1,400 people registered. And the main complaint that is coming from the Gazans is that they are not allowing those who had left to come back. Please come back. And I found that is incredible. I mean, people in a state of genocide, 90% of them must want to leave, not in Gaza. But what is happening on the other side is the Israelis who are leaving. And I think this tells us so much about the relationship that we have with our land. We don't see Palestine in terms of economics. We don't see Palestine in terms of wealth, money, ownership, farms, control over, and the material element of Palestine is not what really matters to us. Palestine, the conceptual Palestine that exists in our identity and our culture that matters. So if Israel loses the demographic factor that has been working in its favor because of the various campaigns of ethnic cleansing and wars and violence, Israel is going to lose, pretty much everything, because that's everything that Israel has. It's just the numbers. So for me, that's very, very important to kind of see the reversal of the migration route going back to Europe, while on the Palestinian side, the insistence on remaining in Palestine. And if you look at it from a historical point of view, sometimes we are caught in this position where we kind of see the daily events, because the daily events are very horrific. 8 people killed in Gaza in the last, 24 hours. A father and a son murdered in their tent in Gaza. A mother and her daughter murdered in a tent in Gaza. And when you kind of see that, it's hard to think big picture. But if you do see it big picture, you're going to see that if there is a civilizational conflict per Huntington or whomever's ideas, about how, ultimately it's going to be a civilizational clash, it's the Palestinian civilization that's obviously prevailing. We are not leaving, but they are.
I've got to ask you this question because obviously there are going to be people out in the audience who will want me to ask this question. There'll be some people, Ramzy, who say, well, the population of Gaza, they're run by Hamas. Hamas is still in control of Gaza and they're preventing the people from leaving. Because that's this kind of narrative that Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir are giving to sort of see or justify their position in Gaza. We've got to get rid of Hamas. And so therefore, if we get rid of Hamas, then most of the Palestinian population will just disappear and they'll stop being a problem for the state of Israel. What do you say about that? How do you answer it?
Right. It's a good question, although it's quite a harsh question, because it kind of puts on the agenda what the likes of Smotrich and Ben Gvir and others are saying. And we know that these guys are, big proponents of rape for some reason. That's becoming a thing in Israel, who's with rape and who's against rape. I mean, that's the kind of world we live in now. But
Yeah.
I would say, about 10 years ago or so, there was an event. I wish I had the exact year, but I am certain it's at least a decade ago. There was the siege on Gaza was very, very harsh. People had no fuel, no food, no nothing. And there was an event in which people gathered by the Rafah crossing, a defense separating Egypt from Gaza. And then they broke it. It wasn't as fortified as it is. Later, it was fortified because of this specific event, with the help of the Americans and American and Israeli construction companies helping the Egyptians kind of keep the Palestinians caged in. But at that time, thousands of people pushed against that fence and they tore it. They tore it apart, and they ran in, not in their tens of thousands, in their hundreds of thousands, into the Sinai desert. And that event took us all by surprise. You could, in retrospect, you could say, well, what do you expect? When my children are starving, I would, tear through concrete with my, bare arms in order for me to save them or provide them with food. But it just happened so quick that we did not know how to even politically contextualize it. And they rushed into Sinai, and then they all came back. They bought fuel. They received a lot of solidarity from the Bedouin and the other people who lived in the Sinai, in the Arish city, in Rafah, because Rafah, remember, it used to be a Palestinian city before it was divided. And they come back with fuel and food, and about 250, people didn't come back. They were students who were studying mostly in Russia and Ukraine and other parts of the world, who stayed so that they would go to their universities. These are the only ones unaccounted for. The vast majority, pretty much everybody else, came back to Gaza. And if that was not, and Hamas was ruling Gaza at the time, nobody was blocking them. The only one who was blocking them was the Egyptian army. And they couldn't. They couldn't block them enough. So if Gazans want to leave, believe me, they can. They would. They don't want to. And we don't see, I mean, you have areas, for example, right now that are not under Hamas's control. They're under the control of the gangs and the militias, the Gazan gangs and militias that are armed by Israel. There are not so many, but there is a good number of them. Why aren't they leaving? It doesn't make sense. They don't want to leave. And of course, I have family in Gaza that, my cousin Ibrahim keeps telling me his wife is still, she went for treatment earlier in the genocide, and they're not allowing her to return. Ramzy, do you know anybody at the United Nations that would bring her? His wife is desperate to go back, and they are trying to bring her back. It's not the other way around. The wife is not in Egypt saying, come on, everybody, join me. No, they want their mother to come back. This is, and that doesn't take me by surprise. Being from Gaza myself, it's just, that's who we are as a people.
Ramzy, do you think that the political elites in the West remain largely disconnected from what's happening in civil society, generally in the Middle East, but specifically among the Palestinian territories?
Um, I don't think, I'm not sure if the term disconnected is the right term. I remember, there is a theory, John, that I think is kind of breaking apart now. Because for many, many years, we've been told that if you tell people the truth, all that you need to do is to expose the truth. Once people know, it would be difficult for terrible things to happen. Even Malcolm X, our beloved Malcolm X, used to always say, just tell them the truth. I mean, he used to repeat that in his speeches. Just tell them the truth. Once the truth is known, the truth is going to set you free. We've been told the same thing following the Holocaust. We've been told the same thing following various genocides around the world, including the Hutus and the Tutsis, that the problem is we did not know. That's the problem. You see, if we knew these things, these terrible things would have not happened, or we would have stopped it from the very start. Well, now we know, and we've been knowing this for 2.5 years, nearly 3 years. And we are knowing it on a daily basis, and we know the absolute details, and we see it sometimes live streamed. We see endless videos and testimonies from doctors and journalists and ordinary people. I mean, the amount of content that came out from Gaza is most likely more than any content that came out from all the wars combined since World War II. So we know, the politicians know, the elites know, the corporations know, but they choose to do what they are doing despite of that knowledge. So I think
that's damning. That's absolutely damning of a system, Ramzy. But also one other thing that I need to inject here, and that is that we're now, quite frankly, living in a very much a post-truth environment. It doesn't matter what video evidence exists, right? I mean, if people can say that the moon landings are fake, that we've got all sorts of flat earthers out there trying to create all these weird theories about the way of the Earth and its shape is, then I mean, where are we exactly? We can't deliver people truth because we choose to deny truth. So even when it's given to us on a silver tray, we say, I'm not looking at that. Doesn't track with my belief structure. That's it. That's it.
But that's what I was going to say to that, John, is that while the elites and the ruling classes, they know, I think they do know the truth. They just choose to ignore it because it does not serve their interests. Ordinary people know, and they are acting upon that knowledge. And that's where the uplifting elements here. 67% of the world population, according to the latest Gallup poll, indicates that 67% of the world population support the Palestinian people and the Palestinian struggle, do not trust Israel, do not trust Netanyahu, do not sympathize with Israel anymore. That shift is so incredible. And if this is not enough, you would say, well, there's always been a lot of sympathy, especially in the global south, with the Palestinians. So maybe these numbers kind of balance it out. No, we're talking about these numbers in Italy, in Spain, in Britain, in many countries in Europe. And even the United States, there was a poll that was hidden, that was the mainstream media chose to ignore it. That was, I think it also was a Gallup poll. It's either Pew or Gallup poll, came out in February or on February 27th, the day before the Iran war. Just hours before the Iran war, this says for the first time in history of that poll, which has been decades, 41% of Americans, all Americans, Democrats, Republicans, young, old, 41% sympathize with the Palestinians and 36% with Israel. Despite, I mean, those who are living in America, or at least familiar with American situation, understand how difficult it is to change minds in America, especially when the Palestinians are almost invisible. I mean, you were very kindly introduced me as a top Palestinian journalist. Not once have I been introduced by a single American mainstream outlet since the start of the genocide, despite the fact that over 110 members of my family were killed, including my own sister. Not once, not a question, not a hint, not a quote. So we are invisible as far as American mainstream media is concerned, yet somehow 41% of Americans sympathize with the Palestinians. And that's a major shift. Prior to that, support for Palestine existed within somewhere between the margin of error and about 10% if it was conducted by a more thoughtful, like Zugby International kind of polling company. And so this shift is incredible. Add to it that 48% of all Americans, according to a poll that just came out a few days ago, 48% says we support Israel too much. We need to stop. So this is happening to the point that the New York Times says not one single Democratic representative or politician will be able to win elections decisively anywhere in the country without taking a more positive position on Palestine. These are incredible numbers. And I know it's like, okay, but the people are still starving in Gaza. Children are still dying in Gaza. Gaza is still on the brink of starvation. The ethnic cleansing is still on the agenda. Yes, it's all true, but the starting point of all of this is that people did not even, I mean, there was an argument in American media whether Palestinians even exist, where many Republicans arguing that Palestinians are an invention. We go from that 2.5 years ago to where we are right now. I think that's a historic change, and I think it's unprecedented compared to any other conflict in the world.
Oh, look, I agree with you. But of course, with everything that's good in what you've said, there's the countervailing bad. And the countervailing bad, of course, is that you can say that the tide is shifting, but within that tide, there are some people who are opportunistically using it to flag deliberately anti-Semitic views. And so it does cast a bit of a pall over pro-Palestinians because rather than being seen as pro-Palestinians and pro-justice for Palestine, they're now being viewed by defenders of Netanyahu and his ilk as, you know, basically anti-Semites. And I mean, even for like the group that you had addressed in Vienna and Dublin, I mean, again, the stock standard response is that they're all self-hating Jews. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't even
yeah.
understand that. I mean, I'm, sitting on the fence, being neither one nor the other, but loving both. I just don't know how to make any sense of this, right? So, yeah, yeah. How do you address this sort of, how do you address the rise of anti-Semitism that has risen concurrently within the broad-based, obviously good swing in favor of Palestine?
Absolutely. So there are several ways of looking at this. I'm gonna take you into a bit of an odd direction here to make my point. At one point, if you watch American media, it's slowed down a bit now, but at one point you just get the impression that all acts of terrorism around the world were carried out by Muslims.
Yeah,
But
well,
whenever they kind of come and look at the violent crimes like mass shootings and all of that in the US, you will find that Muslims are the absolute minority in people carrying out these crimes. While whites were, it's debated, but anywhere between 70 plus percent to 80 plus percent of all violent mass shootings and crimes were carried out by whites. The issue is not who's carrying out the crime. The issue is what are you focusing on, right? So if you come to a conference on Palestine and you will see one person, one single person says, oh, the Jews should be taught a lesson, for example. That person, that tweet, that indication
amplified.
becomes
Mm,
amplified, and
yeah.
then nobody else matters. All the rational intellectuals, historians, the people who advocate coexistence and harmony and one states and all of that, they are all dismissed, marginalized, and that single person becomes the highlight of the story. The other thing I would like to say that Israel's capacity, I mean, Israel never really had the capacity to kind of absorb any kind of criticism without labeling that as anti-Semitism. So if you would say Jews are, okay, you're anti-Semitic, we agree to that. But then if you say, I don't think raping Palestinian prisoners should be a thing, really, you are anti-Semitic. So the spectrum
Yeah.
of that becomes so wide. But
Mm,
there's another thing, and I think that's something that most people don't even know because they don't fully understand the relationship that's happening between Palestinian Arabs, Christians, and Muslims on the ground, and Israeli Jews on the ground as well. I I grew up in a refugee camp, John, where when the Israeli soldiers used to come and raid our house, which happened a lot, especially during the first Intifada in 1987, when we would say, who is it? Of course, we always knew who it is. I mean, they are always trying to break the door down in the middle of the night. They would always say Yahud, meaning Jews. They wouldn't say Zionists. They wouldn't say Israeli soldiers of the secular type, always Jews. Yahud, right? So
mm,
our relationship with Israel, it was based on the way Israel defined itself to us. It's Jewish settlements. They never said Israeli settlements. They never used that word. It's Jewish settlements, Jewish soldiers, Jewish tanks, Star of David everywhere, Jewish soldiers raiding houses, Jewish roads only. Like one time going with my brothers to Birzeit University in the West Bank from Gaza, we used the wrong road that was supposed to be for Jews only. And the soldiers stopped us. And they really roughened up the driver. I mean, it was a scary moment. And they said, did you not know that this is a Jewish only road? Now, in Palestine, if you take a child in the street and say, who killed your father? She's going to say the Jews. Now, not because the poor child is racist, but because these are the only identifiers that were introduced to us by the enemy. You go to a place and you tell people, I am white and you are black, and I am better than you. They are going to think of that relationship based on that. So it's not because of this inherent anti Semitism, but because of the type of relationship that was imposed on us and introduced to us by the enemy. And this is something I feel like people need to know. Yes, anti-Semitism is a real thing. Yes, there are people who hate the Jews for being Jews. And yes, there are people who would say, don't trust even the anti-Zionist Jews. These people cannot be trusted. And I would say, back off. Our conflict here is not with individuals over their religion, culture, or identity. It's over behavior. They exist, but they are the absolute tiny minority in the movement. And quite often we flush them out ourselves because we don't feel comfortable with them amongst us. But these are not the people that bother Israel the most. The ones that bothers Israel the most are the reasonable one, whose criticism is based on facts, values, morality, research, international law. These are the ones that terrify Israel. And that's why if you are of any background and critical of the genocide, you are anti-Semitic. That includes presidents like Jimmy Carter and others. And if you are a Jewish anti-Zionist who is pro-Palestine, you are a self-hating Jew. And that is just packaged and ready to deliver at a moment's notice.
Which then leads me to the other big question here, and that is the role of religion and politics having been deliberately conflated in a way, you were talking about the identity of Israel and the Jewish people within Israel. There is a separation. There is an Israeli citizen. You don't have to be a Jew to be an Israeli citizen. There are Arabs who are Israeli citizens. We don't hear that much of those people. You've got, Ethiopians who are Jewish Ethiopians who have come in, but they're black, but they're still part of the Israeli citizenship, right? The Israeli citizenry. When people start blending religion and politics, it's always a recipe for disaster. I mean, we've only just come out of the war on terrorism where, you've got extremist Muslims who are doing exactly that. And we've now seen just how it has happened in Israel against Palestine and the Palestinian territories. So, where do you think this ends? Because as I go back to what we were talking about before, when most of the intellectuals, the people that would be rational and be able to debate in an open forum against the hardliners, when they're no longer there, and there's only the hardliners with their blended religious political views that are left representing the state of Israel, where and who do the Palestinians negotiate with? How do you move forward from that point? Because from my perspective as an outsider looking at this situation, as I said, you can have all the liberals living in all parts of the world and they're all safe and they're away from the crazies, and that's great. But how can they then influence the state of Israel? Because it's the state of Israel that's prosecuting the war, right?
Right. So, okay. I'm thinking about it in terms of number of bombs being dropped on innocent people. I lived in Gaza and until my 20s, and my family remained in Gaza and in the West Bank. Um, all the tragedies that affected my family, my community, my neighbors, my friends, my people, never been really linked to the ideology of the Israeli government. It's always been the Israeli government, be it liberal, be it conservative, being hardline, being extremist. It never mattered. Whatever the idea, maybe the justification of that war differed. I'll give you an example. After 1967, Israel was ruled by a labor government, right? Um, from a strategic point of view, they thought, listen, Israel from a geographic point of view is not defensible. It needs strategic depth. The strategic depth has to be the occupied West Bank. So what do? We expand the borders of Israel to and we effectively annex the West Bank. Um, in order for them to do that, they needed to bring settlers. The liberal Zionists did not want to. Why? Why should I move, the metropolitan of Tel Aviv and the life on the beach and go and start chasing after some children in Hebron or Nablus? Or I don't want to do that. So the religious communities moved in. Kiryat Arba, the first settlement to be built in the West Bank, and so forth. In that context, the liberals had the strategy of annexing. The conservatives had the religious fervor to give that annexation some sort of a spiritual meaning. With time, the settlers became so powerful that now they control Israeli politics. But ultimately, the strategy the same. I always think of it this way. When bombs are dropped, it matters not what is the ideological foundation of those dropping the bombs. The outcome is going to always be the same: children being burned with their families inside tents. And that has always been the case in Israel. It just sadly, many have bought into this illusion that only if this government wins, it's going to be better for the Palestinians or the Lebanese or the Syrians or the Middle East. But we don't really ever have a single solid proof that demonstrate that this is true.
Which then leads me to the next question, and that is, okay, this year is Netanyahu has to face the Israeli people at an election. There are, as far as I know, at least two pretenders to the crown of the Prime Minister of Israel. You've got Naftali Bennett and you've got Yair Lapid. Now, if Netanyahu gets tossed out, it's possible, but unlikely, because his entire political and, dare I say, personal survival is at stake. He's still under criminal investigation if he steps down from his position as Prime Minister. But assume for a moment that there is this possibility that he gets knocked out at the October election and we get someone else, say a Naftali Bennett. Does this materially change the situation on the ground in Gaza or not?
It could be, but not because of the variables that we think are relevant. Naftali Bennett is a student of Netanyahu. Netanyahu has been his mentor. He's the one who introduced him to politics, and all of that. And then he kind of turned against him, as is the case often is in Israeli politics. Yair Lapid, on the other hand, I've followed his career from, for a while because quite often I'm commissioned to do stories about Yair Lapid, the elections, what will change, what wouldn't. And because Yair Lapid is a very clever guy, I mean, he's not a good politician and definitely not even close to where Netanyahu is, but he understands that in Israel, you just don't appeal to, as a politician, not like it's different in many parts of the world, but you don't appeal to your own ideological foundation, but to your audience. And the Israeli audience does not want to talk about one state solution, I mean, about Palestinian state in any formation. They don't want to talk about settlements. They want to talk about annexation. They don't want to talk about peace and peace process. None of these things are relevant to the Israeli people. 82% or something of that nature of Israelis want ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Majority want the continuation of the genocide. The numbers on Iran are a little bit interesting because you have something like 84% want a war on Iran, but that's only if it's kind of mixed with the number of Arabs and Druze and other minorities. But Israeli Jews, about 90% plus, want a war with Iran. They all want a continuation of the war in Lebanon. So I don't see how Lapid or Naftali Bennett could possibly navigate their way out of this, bringing any fundamental change to this situation. But, and here's the other variable that I feel like could be of slight benefit to the Palestinians, without necessarily challenging the views of these politicians on the genocide, etc. And that is, there is a growing belief in Israel that Israel is bleeding. Israel needs to recover. Israel is losing businesses, money, people. The demographics of Israel is changing in many ways. And most of those who are leaving, as you stated correctly, are the Zionist liberals who are the educated, the high-tech people. We are losing our relationship with the United States. We are isolated. We are alienated. We are not aware of the change that's happening globally. We need to recover. We need a massive PR campaign. We don't need to stop the genocide. We just need to change the messaging. And that could potentially mean, and we also heard the Zamir of the Israeli army, who says that the Israeli army is standing on one leg repeatedly. If you look at establishment media like Ma'arif, Yodoot Ahronot, I mean, forget about Haaretz for now because they've always been pushing the same message. But right-wing mainstream media have been transmitting the message that Israel is breaking apart. And they are talking about civil war as if it's going to happen soon. It might, it will, that sort of thing. So just that kind of convoluted answer to tell you that maybe a new leader for Israel could say, listen, I don't want to own Netanyahu's wars, because they don't like when they continue the wars and the crises of others. And these are wars that are not doing very well. Yes, we still share the same beliefs. Yes, we want to ethnically cleanse Palestinians and we want to defeat Iran and we want to eliminate Hezbollah, but maybe this is not the right time. Maybe we need to take a break and back off just a little. I don't know if the word hope is the right word here, because I have, as I told you, I have very little hope on Israeli political establishment, but this could indeed usher in some sort of a strategic change in Israel's political behavior.
So basically, a strategic pause is what we probably will be seeing before Israel tips into the abyss. Because another issue that's tearing up Israel from the inside is the whole thing with the ultra-Orthodox not wanting to be part of the Israeli military. And of course, the Israeli military, I mean, we have to be real here. Israel, the Jewish component, is actually quite small. What is it, about 7 million out of a total Israeli population of 10? That's a huge burden for, a military burden for a small population to run. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there are multiple businesses closing. There's a brain drain that's going on. These are all long-term efforts that will hurt anyone who inhabits the post of prime minister into the future. So at some point, perhaps circumstance is going to be forcing a degree of let's sit back and reconsider things. But again, I'm not so sure whether or not Netanyahu will be out, because I think that he needs to be out, and the likes of Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all their other right-wing loonies need to go as well to give Israel the breathing space needed to have that strategic pause. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see. Now, Ramzy, I have to ask you because again, our audience will probably be really curious. How strong is Hamas in Gaza today? And I'm not simply asking from a military perspective, I'm asking politically and socially and also psychologically. I mean, has Hamas actually survived as an effective organization, or is it just breaking apart because of all the pounding it's had from the Israeli Defense Force?
I've studied all major Palestinian political factions, groups, resistance movements since the 1948, even prior to that, because of the various books I wrote about Palestinian history. And I think Hamas is the most adaptable of all of these movements. I mean, notice, for example, how if you look at a movement like the socialist movements or Fatah, that you will find that there is like throughout the years, there was like these various breakups branching out to various other movements that break into other movements and so forth and so on. It's like almost like a family tree of movements. Hamas has been the most um, um, composed and the most unified of these movements. If there was any chance of Hamas weakening, splintering, or disappearing, it would have happened. And Israel, I mean, Israel looked at the situation from Hamas is not infrastructure. Hamas is people. Hamas is society. And because I mean you can go and blow up all the station the police stations and all the mosques and assume and all the charities and the hospitals and any entity that's run by Hamas and assume that's going to be the end of Hamas. But Hamas is the people, the ordinary people of Gaza. Have adopted the Hamas message, and it's becomes like a family thing. I mean, I've done lots of interviews with people where the father will be killed, and then the son will join the resistance, and he gets I've seen three, four, kind of numbers of the same family joining the resistance and getting killed. Um, following the same logic. There's not a time where you're gonna have this, kind of disruption where someone say, you know what, we've had enough. I'm not gonna do this anymore. And that's, I think, because Hamas is I mean, forget about Qatar, Hamas in Turkey, Hamas the politics, Hamas's position on Syria or not, but there's Hamas the society. There are refugees, there are descendants of peasants and fallahin in Gaza. There are very familial structures, communal structure, charitable structures, and that's why Israel, in my view, targeted just people, because they thought that there has to be a breaking point where the people would say, enough, we've had enough, we are going to walk away from it. But you cannot create that separation. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes in the analyses regarding Hamas that you kind of see in mainstream media everywhere, is there's the assumption that there is an entity called Hamas and there is another entity called the Palestinian people. And it's never been that way. It's always been Hamas as part of the Palestinian people. You would say, but wait a minute, I mean, why can't you apply the same model to the PFLP? Because there's never been this kind of elitism within, this class elitism within the Hamas movement, where you have, the PLO leadership based in Tunisia with their cadres, and that never existed. They never left. They've always been there. And this is why when Israel offered as many Hamas members to leave, to go and live a good life in Turkey and Qatar, everybody said no. At least, that's what we know. We haven't seen any mass migration of Hamas outside of Gaza, because for Hamas to leave it means that for the people to leave. And I think that kind of a more thoughtful way of understanding Hamas would allow us to understand what happened on October 7 how did we get to that moment, and why the Gazans remain in Gaza and why they continue to fight in Gaza despite of the immense losses that they have suffered.
Many Americans watching this program, Ramzy, continue to see Hamas primarily through the events of October 7. So, how do you explain Palestinian political realities without asking Western audiences to excuse attacks against civilians? Because that's the thing that seems to catch many of the non-Middle Eastern people in this trap when they're reading a newspaper. It's like, those terrorists. You don't want to always excuse the terrorists. How do you manage that?
So I think that there are two dimensions to this. Number one is this historical inevitability that when you are under military occupation, when there is a soldier's boot on your neck day and night, if you live in what we call in history the politics of humiliation, when your people are humiliated on a daily basis, let alone the destruction of homes, the uprooting of orchards and trees, the killing of children, the lack of any political horizon. No, not only that you have no freedom, no equality, no nothing, but you don't, like, you look far and you don't even see any potential of change. There is going to be a point where people just blow up. And it's during the second intifada, literally, what Palestinians call the martyrdom attacks and what mainstream call suicide bombings, but literally people blow up. And I think, my gosh, I wish I could remember the name. It was an Australian historian who actually came up with the theory, linking suicide bombings in particular with humiliation. And he studied various polities, including Iraq, of course, under the American occupation, Sri Lanka as well, and other policies. There is a direct relationship. Now, in my writings up to October 7, I spoke repeatedly about the explosion. I kept warning that there is an explosion that is going to happen. I couldn't tell the nature of that explosion, of course, but I know Palestinian history enough to tell you that you keep pushing people up to a certain point, there is going to be an explosion. And by the way, I was assuming that the explosion is going to happen in the West Bank, not in Gaza. That's where I went wrong in my analysis. And that explosion still did not happen in the West Bank, even after the genocide. It ended up happening in Gaza. So that's one element about violence in general. Why do people at one point say enough is enough, and they kind of commit these acts of violence that are, unfortunately, mainstream media always delink it. Like, they always look at Palestinian violence as the beginning of things, not the outcome of other things that existed prior to it. And that takes us to October 7. Ilan Pappé, the very well-known and respected Israeli historian, spoke about October 7 in two different ways. One is the actual attack on the Gaza envelope, on the military infrastructure of the Israeli army that has been besieging Gaza for decades, and they are usually, it's called the Southern Command, and the Southern Command exists in settlements and in various military bases in an area that Israel refers to as the Gaza envelope. That's few kilometers into Israel at the I believe the eastern and border of Gaza, and then the attacks that happened on settlers or civilians in that area. And there are two distinctions here. If you look at it from a military point of view, what happened was completely unexpected by Israel. I mean, their job is to besiege those Palestinians, and within a few hours they were routed out. I mean, their generals were killed or kidnapped, and so forth and so on. But then what also happened regarding the civilians? And I don't think there is a serious Palestinian historian or intellectual who said, yes, go for the civilian, kill as many as you can. But what we try to explain to people, that these events don't happen in a vacuum. It's easy to come and say, I condemn what happened on October 7, but the real challenge and the real scholarship and the real intellect and the real courage, I think, is to explain what happened in October 7 within the larger context of everything that happened prior to October 7. In fact, I wrote a book about it. called before the flood. The flood meaning because it is called Al-Aqsa flood, what happened from the Palestinian narrative. And I wanted to explain to the world what happened before the flood. And by the way, it's been going on for about 4 generations. And I'm going to tell you the story from the very, very beginning up to the point of what took place on October 7th.
Yes, yes, and we will have a link in our show notes with regard to your book. I think it's very important that people actually start seeing things from a more serious perspective and not just always getting bamboozled by the mainstream media, who we know keep our filters in a very simplistic form in order to get their headline. But look, let's look at another aspect of Hamas and its relationship with the Palestinian Authority. When I was introducing this program, I did say that, one of the questions that I raised is, well, the Palestinian Authority is there. According to who, maybe the international community, it is the legitimate voice of the Palestinians, but we know that it is being ruled by its own octogenarian class, headed by Mahmoud Abbas, and it's not doing that much that's positive, and its ability to leverage whatever it has against Israel in order for it to prevent Jewish settlers from expanding into the rest of the West Bank and perhaps even annexing territory is extremely limited. But then you've got this other group, Hamas in Gaza, that is as you say a social movement. It's not just a political party that's separate from the people that is under its administrative jurisdiction. How does Hamas and the Palestinian Authority work together, or do they not work together? Are ideological differences and the experiences of Palestinians in Gaza so fundamentally different to those in the West Bank that they just can't cooperate at a tactical level?
Right. I'm going to be bold here and say ideology has very little to do with it. Maybe ideology has something to do with it from Hamas's point of view, but not from the Palestinian Authority's point of view. The Palestinian Authority does not behave according to a set of ideological and moral values or even a political doctrine. This was the case at one point when Fatah was a movement that carried certain kind of ideological beliefs, and it was the most encompassing of Palestinian movements because it did not have the rigidity of the various socialist movements, and it was open to everybody, Muslims and Christians, people from all walks of life, the intelligentsia, but the ordinary. That kind of popularity under the character of Yasser Arafat made it the main Palestinian political movement. After Oslo, things have changed. That political movement itself splintered. I mean, Fatah is no longer one single unit. I mean, many are still, within the movement, either left or kind of branched out and they did their own thing. You have the more militant, principled, if you will, Fatah that is under the leadership of Marwan Barghouti, who has been in Israeli prison for decades. And they are doing everything, including the Palestinian Authority, doing everything to keep him in Israeli prison. Because once he leaves, there's going to be a rupture in Fatah. And they don't want that rupture to happen. So what is the current Palestinian Authority? It's a class. It's not an ideological class. It's a class. It's a socioeconomic class. These are people who benefit from the Israeli occupation. They make money because of the. In fact, when the Americans and others, the so-called donor countries, allocate their funds to the Palestinian Authority, part of the funds actually go to Israel to help the Palestinian Authority control the Palestinians in the West Bank. So this is why when people, even Hamas itself, was talking about unity, it's time for unity, I was like, it's impossible. You cannot bridge the gap between a certain class that exists for its own material benefit and, on the other hand, another group of people, be it the socialists or the Islamists or any others, who in their own mind, they exist for the liberation of Palestine and behave, again, in their own definition accordingly. So you cannot bridge these. These are not two separate political movements that you are trying to find the overlap. Well, we all love Palestine and we all want to liberate Palestine, and that's that's enough for us to be united. It's not, and it's never been that way. And in fact, for many, many occasions in which the Palestinian Authority will get closer under popular pressure to form some sort of a bureaucratic unity government with the other groups. And by the way, Hamas is not the only group. You are talking about at least 10, if not 12, various Palestinian factions. And some of them are quite important, like Islamic Jihad, like the PFLP, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and so forth and so on. Whenever they get close, the Americans will say, and I do remember in one particular situation, it was Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice back in the day when she told Mahmoud Abbas, you formulate a unity government with Hamas, no more money from the United States. And oh, he dropped it. He dropped it immediately. You see, so that's really the issue here, is that you are not dealing with people like, listen, John, you and I might have different opinions about so many different things in the world, but if we have something in common, a love for a homeland, the need for coexistence, tolerance, that sort of thing, regardless of what they are, and we will find that common ground. For the Palestinian Authority, it's never been about the common ground. It's been about the Palestinian Authority, about the money they receive, about the funds, about the, Ramallah has millionaires living in mansions that I doubt that wherever you are in the world, John, whatever city you are in, they might not have that kind of, that kind of architecture, that kind of palaces, that kind of mansions, the kind of cars that they drive. So I think we Palestinians often kid ourselves by saying unity, 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 but unity based on what? What principles, what values that keep us together? So I don't think there will be unity with this Palestinian Authority. Either the Palestinian Authority itself will disintegrate, Fatah might reclaim its legacy, or Hamas will eventually take over. There could be an intifada, an uprising in the West Bank that could formulate a new leadership in the West Bank, new political outlooks. But this particular Palestinian Authority, with the degree of corruption that involves among that lot, I don't see it.
It just raises another issue. I mean, this podcast is a gift that keeps on giving. So the expansion of Israeli or Jewish settlements in the West Bank, we tend to think, well, it's all one-sided. It's all about Israel, the power that it has over that territory. But in actual fact, from what you've just said, there is another side to things, and that is the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, their ability to act as Israel's facilitators on the ground to carve up and turn that territory from a contiguous area run by Palestinians into what looks like, I don't know, it's akin to a piece of Swiss cheese when you look at the map, where Israeli settlements or Jewish settlements are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the areas for the Palestinians are getting smaller, and they're all disconnected from each other. So I don't know. I mean, gosh, what a depressing topic. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly something that needs to be looked at in terms of how can the two sides, well, the two largest entities, one in Gaza, one in the West Bank, come together in some form. Do you think that the way that Israel juts itself between Gaza on the one side and the West Bank on the other, that geographic division, almost gives a sort of sense of inevitability to a political split between Gaza and the West Bank, irrespective of what the politics is, that geography dictates the terms on the ground ultimately?
Indeed, I mean that's the plan. And when the West Bank itself rebelled, just to prove your point, particularly in the northern West Bank, Jenin, Tulkarem, these areas in the furthest, the tip of the northern tip of the West Bank, when they began rebelling using armed struggle, popular mobilization, that sort of thing, Israel came, ethnically cleansed over 40,000 families, destroyed various villages and refugee camps, and pushed them elsewhere because they are trying to prevent that kind of thinking, that kind of anti-Palestinian Authority, independent Palestinian thought to kind of, take hold anywhere in the West Bank. They don't want that. So they ended up like effectively, just pushing most of the northern West Bankers into other parts, living as stateless, homeless people somewhere else because they are afraid that the Gaza syndrome, from their point of view, will spread in the West Bank. This is an ideal scenario for Israel. But when we talk about the Palestinian Authority's corruption, I mean, even the Americans talk about it. Even European donors talk about it. But they talk about corruption in terms of money. Like, oh, they are stealing money. This is just a small part of the corruption. We're talking about moral corruption. We're talking about political corruption in Palestine. We're talking about people who have disowned their own people for their own material benefit. So sometimes even the word corruption needs clarification. Well, what does a Palestinian mean by corruption versus what does, I don't know, the British government means by corruption? It's not just about money. It's about your role in that struggle. If the Palestinian Authority, and we've been calling on the Palestinian Authority for years and years, you need to formulate, okay, you are against armed struggle, fine. But you need to formulate your own resistance strategy, because Israel is not going to be pushed out of the West Bank without some form of resistance. You're not going to ask them nicely. You're not going to negotiate politely, in Geneva or in New York, ending the occupation. You have to make the occupation too costly for Israel to maintain it, so that in order for it to end. So please, Mahmoud Abbas, come up with an idea. Strikes, civil disobedience, mass mobilization in the streets, anything. Never once did the Palestinian Authority come with any strike to the country. They would crack down on any Palestinian who would even suggest, I'm not saying on any Palestinian who fights back, no, any Palestinians who actually tries to stand up to Israel. Nobody talks about the Palestinian prisoners, by the way, in Palestinian Authority prisons. There are many of them. Sometimes they go on hunger strikes, and actually, I think a couple of them are on hunger strikes right now. Nobody is listening to them. These are Palestinian, mostly intellectuals, sometimes social media activists, writing a poem against Mahmoud Abbas. They will find themselves in a Palestinian prison. So this is why I'm saying, we Palestinians now since the beginning of the genocide, I think this became kind of a wholesale understanding, is that if Palestinians are on one side and Israel on the other side, the Palestinian Authority is standing on the side of Israel.
What about what about the younger people? I mean, as I said, I mean, Abbas, he's old. He's very old, and I don't think he's in good health either. Surely, even among the second tier younger members of the Palestinian Authority, I mean, they may get some benefit from the higher ups, financial and whatever, but surely there must be someone that's free and able to see what's happening and can strike a better deal for Palestinians generally. Is there any such person? I mean, if Barghouti is in prison and will not be released by the Israelis for the reasons that you've said,
Right.
who's out and about
Right.
close to the Palestinian Authority who's young enough to take over and make sense of this mess?
Right. So as someone who has dedicated most of his academic career to people's history, I tell you the answer is that there is no such a person, but there are lots of persons with an S at the
Right.
end. And
Okay.
indeed, these persons exist. It's just the way that they behave. It's not a way that we can easily gauge or understand or analyze, because these are social movements that just appears. Sometimes it may seem to us that they appear in the middle of, from nowhere, but in actuality, it's not the case. They exist, they are there, the tension is there, the rage is there, the anger is there, the mobilization is there. It is all about finding the margin, the right moment for them to make their appearance. I think anyone who tries to, let's say, fix the Palestinian Authority right now would either be imprisoned or killed. If it's not by Israel, it's going to be by the Palestinian Authority itself. So I think this is not the right time for it. Israel is very vigilant, very aware of any subtle changes happening in West Bank society, and they are very, very sensitive about it. I mean, we've seen videos of Israeli soldiers, arresting children in their 7 and 8 and 9
Yeah.
in the middle of the night. They are that sensitive about any sort of mobilization happening in society. But I think Once that moment arrives, I think the Palestinian Authority will not be sustainable. If Israel feels that the Palestinian Authority does not serve its interest anymore, gives up on the Palestinian Authority, I think for the Palestinians it's going to be the matter of days before the whole thing is sorted out, because their support amongst ordinary Palestinians is basically a margin of error. And when you have that kind of support in society, I think it's just a matter of time before you just pack your bags and go. And
Ramzy. Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
John, if you don't mind, I do have to go quite soon, though.
Yes, yes. Okay, I'll do one more question because I think it's an important one, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, thank you, Ramsey. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so Ramsey, it fascinates me how quickly the conversation has shifted. We hear surprisingly little about Gaza itself today. We don't even hear about the discussions from reconstruction. Do you remember those luxury developments, the economic corridors that were promised, the seaside resorts, the large-scale foreign investment? Has President Trump effectively forgotten Palestine?
I think he's busy with with bigger things right now, and that is Iran. I mean, I think he did not expect what he saw. Maybe if he asked people like me, we would have told him, the history is not shaped through wishful thinking, and you cannot go after a society like Iranian society, and you expect, if you remember that term cakewalk, the one that they have used to describe their invasion of Iraq, and we also know how badly that invasion backfired against the empire in the Middle East. And we knew that Iran would be a lot tougher for anyone, especially anyone who wasn't really committed to a long war. He just wanted something snappy, like what he did in Venezuela, flexing his muscles, talking about the great American army and the great this and great that, and just move on to have a decisive victory in the elections. And that did not happen. And now he's stuck. He cannot escape. He would love for time to go back and none of this to have happened. But he can't, and he's stuck now, and he has to live with that reality he created for himself. But I do think that that reality, though, will have impact on Gaza. And I did write about it. If your listeners can go to thinkingpalestine.com and choose the theme regarding the Iran war, you're going to find lots of really interesting articles about how the potential outcome of the Iran war can reshape the Middle East, including Israel and the relationship between Israel and the various polities, be it Gaza, be it Lebanon. So these are not two separate things. But regarding the reconstruction of Gaza, I think Israel is still hoping that the outcome of Iran and Lebanon is going to be in its favor, and it's going to emerge more empowered and with the kind of military legitimacy that would allow it to go back to Gaza and push the Palestinians out. I think the ethnic cleansing of Gaza remains top on the Israeli agenda, and they are just waiting for the Iran war to conclude in order for them to make a determination whether it is time to ethnically cleanse Gaza or not. So we have to be very vigilant regarding this point.
Ramsey, thank you very much for your time and thank you for joining us again on The Focus. It's been absolutely a pleasure having you here, and I could talk to you for another 2 hours on this. So hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Thanks a million, John, and keep up the good work, man.
Thank you, sir. Final remarks. Now, as always, our aim here at The Focus is not to tell you what to think, but to help you think more deeply about strategic forces shaping our world today. Whether your sympathies lie with Israel, Palestine, or somewhere in between, one fact is difficult to escape. There can be no lasting regional stability in the Middle East while the Palestinian question remains unresolved. Military victories may alter the balance of power. Diplomacy may pause conflicts and governments may change, but history shows us that unresolved political grievances have a habit of returning, often when least expected. Now, on to questions for our audience. After nearly 3 years of war, do you believe a negotiated two-state solution is realistically achievable, or has the persistence of war as an instrument of policy changed the political landscape? What role, if any, should the United States play in shaping the future of Israel and Palestine? Should Washington remain deeply engaged, reduce its involvement, or pursue an entirely different approach? Beyond military ceasefires and promises of reconstruction, what do you believe is the single most important step needed to create a durable and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians? Let us know in the comments section below. Thanks to all of you for joining us this episode, and many thanks to our producers Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, please like, subscribe, and share the episode. It really does help us continue bringing thoughtful voices from around the world to your screens. Until next time, I'm Dr. John Bruni, and you've been listening to the Focus Podcast.